All His Pretty Girls by Charlie Cox. Chapter 2. 4 days earlier, Monday, March 25, 3:30 p.m. We, the jury, find Marcus Bloomfield guilty on all charges. Cheers and sobs alike erupted throughout the hot, stuffy courtroom as soon as the words left the foreman's lips, and as the judge banged her gavel and called for order, Detective Alyssa Watt felt as though a granite boulder had been lifted off her shoulders. Though she had never really doubted the district attorney's ability to get a conviction, there had been times over the years when she'd unpleasantly surprised by the unpredictability of a jury. Watching Bloomfield's cold, impassive face as the verdict was read, she couldn't help but think of her own family's tragedy all those years ago, when she was only 9 years old. But when the couple in front of her turned around and mouthed "thank you," Alyssa knew this is why she'd come today, for these parents and for their daughter, who Bloomfield had stalked for weeks, finally following her back to her apartment where he spent hours torturing her before stabbing and leaving her for dead. Somehow she'd survived that brutal attack and had managed to call 911. Several witnesses had described seeing a black pickup truck in the area in the days before the attack, and with the help of security cameras placed around the apartment complex, Alyssa had been able to zoom in and get a license plate, enabling her to track Bloomfield to his home on the west side. The second he saw them, he bolted out the back, but Alyssa was ready, taking him to the ground by shooting 1,200 volts through his body. From the evidence they obtained inside his house, the young woman wasn't his first victim, but Alyssa made sure it was his last. Through the grapevine, she'd heard that HBO had offered the woman and her parents a lucrative sum for their story. The parents had informed them that their daughter's suffering was not for sale, and to never call again before hanging up on the caller. Someone tapped her arm, and Alyssa turned to her left. Her partner, Cord Roberts, leaned his head toward the exit, and Alyssa nodded, giving the parents' shoulders a squeeze as she stood to leave. Outside, she shooed a stray cat away as she, Cord, and her favorite forensic artist, Liz Watterson, who had rendered the sketch that led to Bloomfield's arrest, walked down the steps of the county building. Liz's satchel containing her sketchpad, charcoals, pencils, and facial recognition catalog thumped against her back as she slowed her pace to match Alyssa's. Years ago, someone had asked Liz why she always had those things with her, and she said, "I'm superstitious that way," and left it at that. Now, she swiped an imaginary check mark in the air and said, "One less pervert roaming the streets." "Unfortunately, there's never a shortage of them out there," Alyssa said as Cord nodded his agreement. "Sadly, it's true," Liz replied after moving ahead. "I'll catch you two later. I'm off to the cemetery. 37. She waved before trotting down the rest of the steps and headed in the opposite direction. Every year on her sister's birthday, Liz announced the age her sister would have been and placed flowers on the grave. 5 years ago, just as Cord was signing on as her partner, Alyssa had solved the mystery of Liz's murder sibling. Unknown to her family, an ex-boyfriend of Amelia's had started coming around. When she rebuffed him, his explosive temper had taken over, and after beating her, he shot her in the face point blank. It had taken Alyssa less than a week to determine who Amelia's killer was and arrest him. Shortly after the man's conviction, Liz requested to be transferred to their precinct. Alyssa wished it hadn't been under those circumstances, but she was grateful to have her on their team. Before heading 1 block to the designated parking garage for officers and courthouse officials, Alyssa pulled out her phone and turned the sound back on. When she saw the blinking blue light, she opened her text to find a message from her husband, asking how things had gone. "Guilty on all charges," she replied before catching up to her partner, who waited at the corner. "Wish you and Sarah could have come to Holly's party," she said, switching gears from professional to personal. "It might have been easier to ignore Mabel if you guys were there. I swear that woman could drive Mother Teresa to drink if she was still alive." That woman was Alyssa's interfering mother-in-law, who never passed up an opportunity to let her daughter-in-law know how she felt about her. "Sorry, Liz. Had a baseball game to play." "Still, wish you'd been there. Then you'd see once and for all I haven't been exaggerating about her all these years." "Never thought you were," Cord said. "At least you can be grateful you don't have to deal with her every Sunday anymore." "True. Yet she still finds a way to make my land of enchantment a house of horrors." Alyssa grimaced, remembering the days when Mabel had insisted on spending Sundays with her beloved son and grandchildren. However, both Holly and Isaac were teenagers with busy schedules, so the Sunday ritual had thankfully gone by wayside. Still, the time spent with her husband's mother came all too frequently for her taste. But she tolerated it, because Mabel was the only grandparent her children had. Brock's father had died before Holly was born, and her own parents, well, even if they'd been alive, there was no telling what kind of grandparents they'd be. Would her children, like her, be nothing more than a daily reminder of Alyssa's mistake? She slowed as they came to one of her favorite cafes situated next door, at the parking garage. "I need coffee. Want some?" she asked, already reaching for the door. Predictably, her partner shook his head even as he reached around her to hold the door. Chivalrous to the bone. "No thank you. I'll never understand how you manage to sleep with all that caffeine running through your veins." As they waited in a line, Alyssa continued where she'd left off. "Did I tell you Mabel mentioned buying that vacant house on our street so she could be closer?" She winced, remembering the panic she'd felt to that prospect. "You ever consider she gives you such a hard time because she knows you don't like her?" Cord asked, reaching out a steady and attentive 20-something girl who nearly collided into him as she texted on her phone and then had the audacity to glare at him as if he had been at fault instead of hers. Alyssa ignored the people around her and stared at her partner like he'd suddenly grown two heads. "What? Just what? Haven't you been listening? She's never liked me. Ever. Seriously, the woman wore all black to our wedding. If people didn't know better, they would have thought they were attending a wake. Maybe black's her color." Her response was to roll her eyes. "She's rude and undermines everything I say. I don't know what to tell you, my friend. You know that saying, though. Kill 'em with kindness," Cord winked. "Sure, that'll work." Not. Now in the front of the line, she paused long enough to place her order. A grande black coffee, no room for cream, and a decaf passion fruit tea for Cord, though he hadn't asked for it. "I know it was Holly's birthday, but Lord Almighty, I didn't think our party was ever going to end." Cord leaned against the counter as Alyssa watched the barista make 3 fancy coffees before finally pouring her brew. Her mouth salivated. The poor kid behind the counter barely had a chance to set the cup down before she snatched it up and took a careful sip. Her eyes nearly rolled to the back of her head as she let out a sigh of contentment. "Ever consider that addiction of yours might cause a health issue somewhere down the road?" Cord asked as they headed back outside. It wasn't the first time he'd posed the question to her, and her answer was the same as always. "Nope. So do you want to take a stab at what she got Holly for her birthday?" Even Brock about lost his mind, she said as they made their way up the ramp to where Alyssa's car was parked. Isaac, on the other hand, suddenly became the most attentive brother on the planet when he saw what his grandmother got her. He was tripping all over himself trying to please his sister. "If I hadn't been so pissed, it would have been funny. Go ahead. Guess." "A yacht? A Lamborghini?" Cord volunteered. Alyssa shot her partner what both her kids called the mom looked, paired with her detective look. It could bode danger for the person on the receiving end. "Be serious. Plane tickets to Europe this summer with any friend of her choice. All summer. Any friend. That's what." Alyssa, trim, athletic, and solid at 5'3", had a 6'4" attitude when she was good and angry. And this weekend she'd definitely been good and angry. Cord choked on his tea and his eyes widened comically. "Seriously? How can I get your mother-in-law to adopt me?" "You can have her," she muttered under her breath. Cord laughed. "Just kidding. But seriously, didn't the woman ever see Taken, that movie where the girl's kidnapped in Europe and set up for human trafficking?" "We already told her no when she suggested it 2 months ago. She just wants to give her first grandchild the experience of a lifetime," Alyssa mimicked her mother-in-law. "We can even explain, well, Brock did, because she sure as hell wasn't listening to me, that we weren't comfortable with the idea of Holly trapezing around Europe by herself. Her situation was to get 2 tickets so she wouldn't be alone." Her Chevy Tahoe in sight, Alyssa pressed her key fob twice to unlock the doors. Before Cord slid into the passenger side, he glanced up, then cleared his throat in a way that told her whatever he was about to say she wasn't going to like. "Holly is 18 now. Maybe it's time to let her get some life experiences under her belt." She was right. She didn't like it. She glared at her partner over the hood of the car. "Life experiences? Why does she need to go to Europe to get life experiences? She can get them here just fine in New Mexico." What Alyssa didn't mention was that she knew if push came to shove that Holly was now legally an adult, and she could venture anywhere she liked, with whomever she liked, with or without her parents' permission. Of course, since she was still living under their roof. Alyssa opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. As soon as Cord climbed in, she said, "You know what? Forget I brought it up." She knew his silence was less capitulating than it was speculation. Either way, for now, the subject was closed. She turned the ignition and shifted into reverse just as her phone rang, the car's built-in Bluetooth flashing the caller's name. "You're needed for a missing persons call. Ruby," the squadron's no-nonsense secretary said before Alyssa could issue a greeting. Once upon a time, there'd been a secret pool placing bets on Ruby's age. Nobody had won because she'd found out, and there had been hell to pay. Getting on Ruby's bad side was never a good idea. It had been sent that the cops in her precinct would rather face a gunman than a pissed-off Ruby. Joe and Tony are already there, taking the initial report. Husband reports wife was missing when he came home from work. Name's McCormick, Rafe and Callie. She rattled off an address and then snapped out. "Are you getting all this down, detective?" Alyssa could picture the woman looking down her bespectacled nose as she barked out information. "I've got it, Ruby," Cord answered, "and we're on it." "Good," was all she said before she ended the call, making both of them chuckle. Not even Cord's charming personality could melt Ruby's outer shell. Warm was definitely not one word she'd used to describe the grandmotherly-looking secretary. It was a clear case of deceptive appearances. Well, I didn't really want to do any paperwork today anyway, Alyssa said as she released the brake and headed to the McCormick residence.